This is the Discovering the Blue Hour author writing podcast. On today's episode, we will talk about the work in progress during the Blue Hour's evolution of the main character, Sirena, in her post-apocalyptic society. So stay tuned. Hi, welcome back. This is Jasenia Cheyenne, and you're listening to the Discovering the Blue Hour podcast. This is an author writing podcast where every week I will be talking about writing topics pertaining to my work in progress book during the Blue Hour. So if you like learning about world building, character backstories, and POV, this is the place to listen to them. The week before, I talked about how to choose a character name and why it's important to research for a character. This week, I want to put a spotlight on the main character, Sirena, of the work in progress during the Blue Hour, and go a little deeper into her character and break her down. Well, I mentioned in the first and second episodes that Sirena as a character was thought of first before anything else, but her evolution as a character spanned many drafts and is still progressing as I continue working on the drafts. Her name changed many times, so with each name change, there was a new version of her. Sirena, in every draft except for the TV pilot draft that I wrote, was always a 17-year-old ballet student getting ready to turn 18. And I'm keeping her age the same. I'm not going to change her age no more. I was told to age her down in the TV pilot draft that I did because it would possibly sell better. But yeah, I'm not going to do that. Well, anyway, she is 17, going to be 18 at the end of the book, and she lives in a post-apocalyptic world, and she studies ballet dancing since she was 3. I'll go into post-apocalyptic genre more in my world-building episode, but basically when writing the post-apocalyptic genre, the story themes usually either involve aliens, astronomical phenomena, cozy catastrophes, environmental disasters, failure of modern technology, pandemics, and war. And it may revolve around attempts to prevent an apocalyptic event, deal with the impact and consequences of the event itself, or maybe set after the event, focusing on the travels of psychology of survivors, such like in the novels Cormac McCarthy, The Road. I don't know if anybody has read that book, but I read that book in my freshman year of college, and honestly, I didn't like it. There was no sort of action whatsoever. It was just two people, a man and his son, walking, evading unknown pursuers. I felt like it was too dry, and the pacing was tremendously slow. You don't really get a sense of what happened to make them even be on that road. Hell, you don't even get to know their names. And I get it. I could be wrong, but to me, it was about the man and son bonding in a shitty kind of messed up way. I don't want to write my novel like that. It won't be in a way where it's about aliens or a pandemic or virus or disaster that destroyed the world of the Blue Hour. But like I said, I'm going to talk more about that in a later episode. During the Blue Hour is more like other works of fiction, such as The Giver, where the existence of pre-catastrophe civilization has been forgotten or mythologicized. The Giver himself is the only one in the book knowing about the old world beforehand. And I thought that was pretty cool. I love that book. I love The Giver. And I thought that was pretty cool how they set that up. Yeah, in The Giver, so he was the only one besides Jonas, and he had to give those memories of what happened to the world before to Jonas. So that's a spoiler if anyone hasn't read The Giver, but I love that book. And so I would say the society where my main character, Sirena, lives is a mashup between The Giver, The Wheel of Time, and Ayn Rand's novella Anthem, where it's post-apocalyptic stories often takes place in a non-technological future world or a world where only scattered elements of society and technology remain. So that's basically my novel, like where scattered elements of society and technology remain. Because during the Blue Hour world, the world has ended at least twice. So I have a setup. So as I talked a little bit about this in my first episode of how I went into writing a prequel and I wrote about the world beforehand for way before Sirena is even born. So yeah, it has ended twice, and the town where Sirena lives is surrounded by desert, where like these stories of where desert animals roam make the government officials use scarce tactics against the community so they won't go beyond the borders of the town. And in actuality, the desert animals are the werewolves, as so the reader will come to find out. So, like in The Giver with the character Jonas, and during the Blue Hour, Sirena doesn't really know about the world before, but unlike Jonas, she and others in her society see everything as like they're told as myths or legends, and they're given like spoken down by word of mouth or like whispers. So, and most likely it would be word of mouth, because whispers, that would be more like recent. So it's not more whispers, but I mean like they're speaking in whispers against the government. So, but at the same time, it's the legends of like the old world. So it's word of mouth mostly. So that's how I'm gonna set it up. So my book has that. The book has that aspect. And like Jonas from The Giver and Anthemium, she's assigned a job at the beginning of the book, and I thought that was so cool. And Anthemium and The Giver, that they're given these jobs, and I think Divergent has done it as well. They've given them assign them different jobs, but I did it a little differently, and I don't mainly focus on this. So, and that's the difference. The difference with her in this novel, in my novel, is that she rebels immediately in chapter 1. Like, you don't see them giving her the job assignment in like the first sentence of chapter 1, and I'll go more into that in other episodes about how I did the first page. But in like the very first sentence, she mentions, I ran away from the Prestige Assembly. She ran away from the Prestige Assembly. So she talks about that in the very first sentence. So she rebels in the very first sentence. So you don't really get to see that as much. But she's given an assignment immediately upon graduating from high school. And she's given an assignment that she is one who has to go out into the desert and scavenge for food for the community. So then there's that. However, her rebellious streak leads her to never go out into the desert for that purpose, but only later toward the end of the book for the actual purpose that she's a werewolf, must leave the community. And so this aspect of her character is a big change from other drafts, and that the first draft I wrote of her character, there wasn't any kind of societal constraints as conflicting her character plot to hinder her character plot conflict. In the last draft, she had no character versus society conflict, but more of a character versus character conflict throughout the whole novel. And in this draft, I dialed the character versus character conflict down a couple of notches. And as of right now, as I'm writing this current draft, I'm worried that this little addition to the story of her society constraints will harm rather than help the draft, because I feel like it might be like a throwaway conflict where I mention it one time and never mention it again. Well, at least not in this first book, because I don't really pay attention to that assignment, and that's what I'm mainly paying attention to: her dancing, her ballet dancing, her becoming a werewolf, and the truth about the werewolves and how she discovers she's a werewolf. So that's what I meant to pay attention to. But this human post-apocalyptic society greatly connects to the werewolf societies in many ways. Even though the werewolf societies will be heavily mentioned in the first book, it won't be introduced until the second book. So I'm doing it it won't be introduced into the second book. It's mainly, I guess, like a build-up of Serena's world first, and then how she's introduced into the werewolf's world. Because I want to do more than one book. It's going to end up being 4 books, and there's so many other series of books. And then the second book, there will be a different type of human society introduced versus the human society that Sirena is in the first book. So there's going to be a totally different type of human society community I won't go back to the human side that Sirena is in until the third or fourth book, in where I talk about that community's downfall and sort of like a domino effect reaction to what happens after Sirena and the pack finally leaves to wander the desert in search for a cure or the other werewolves in book one. So in turn, there will be many factions of both humans and werewolves. Since I'm more of a screenwriter, I tend to use the hero's journey model within this novel instead of the 3-act structure model. And we're going to just sidestep a little bit back into Teen Wolf because we talked more about Teen Wolf last week. And in episode 1, we're going to continue to use Teen Wolf throughout my podcast as a reference because that's the only werewolf story that I came close enough to like looking at versus reading any good werewolf genre fiction. So that's why we're going to use Teen Wolf as a reference point throughout my whole podcast. So we're going to sidestep back into Teen Wolf for a minute and explaining 2 points right now in the hero's journey, which is the difference between the incident and the call to adventure and the refusal of the call and an refusal to the call. And the reason why I'm talking about these today is because this segues into me also talking about the evolution of Sirena. So an inciting incident that occurs is the event that triggers everything. It may or may not happen to the main character. It is the event that sooner or later affects the character, in which case, for Scott, it happened immediately, where it was the moment Scott was in the woods and got bitten. People have gotten that confused. The call to adventure, where the personal event that happens to the protagonist is a call to start his journey. The call to adventure was cited in the Teen Wolf pilot when Styles tells Scott that everything that was happening was because he was a werewolf and that he was cursed and that night was going to be the full moon. It was going and Scott was going to transform. Scott refuses the call and goes to the party that he was going to take Allison to anyways. So he goes and takes her to the party, which in this case, for my main character, Sirena, the inciting incident affects her through her friend disappearing, and it's an uproar in the town, but that affects the effects of this inciting incident doesn't affect Sirena immediately until later in the book. Serena's call to adventure is when she is saved by the orphan pack and told that she is one of them and she must stop dancing and go with them before her transition on her 18th birthday. She therefore refuses the call and dances anyway, causing more conflict between her society and the werewolves in the novel. So both Scott from Teen Wolf and Sirena from my work in progress refused the call. Scott all the way until the end of season 1. If you look all throughout all season 1, at the end of episode 1, he wants to search for a cure. So that's his motivation throughout all the way through the end of season 1. And until the end of season 1, when Derek kills the elf instead of himself to cure himself. So that's what he refuses that call. So if you pay attention, he doesn't accept the call in the pilot episode like most people think. But if you think he does, then let me know and we can have a conversation about that. A nice, friendly conversation, please. I would love to hear your thoughts about that, if he did accept the call to adventure in the pilot versus I feel he was pushed to accept the call. He wasn't really he didn't really accept it. So he technically didn't accept the call. He was pushed at accepting the call. So, and we're going to talk more about that later okay, so my main character, Sirena, refuses the call all the way up until the end of the book, where her own family becomes in danger by opposing werewolves. In the fact that this might make her a person who is selfish and not likable, the explanation I give for this is the believability factor, in that the myths in her world are actually truths. So she's selfish to the simple fact because she can't rap. She's forced herself in the middle of the novel and in the first draft and the second draft to try and not believe what is before her. Truths come out, and her reactions to those truths is to withdraw and bottle up her sense of believability. Within the drafts, I never never change that. That's what I wanted to convey, and I believe I've done it really well. But even though she finally accepts the transformation for what it is, by the end of the book, she still can't subconsciously wrap her head around that all of it is truth. So is she still refusing the call? And this is the same thing, like I said, with Scott. Even though he accepts, so I want to say, my character, is she refusing the call? Yes, I would say yes, because in her mind, she wants to find a cure by the end of the book. She only accepted the physical call, which is the transformation. The same with Scott. He only accepted the physical call. Emotionally, he didn't accept he refused the call. And emotionally, he refused the call all the way up until the end of the season, when he realized that he couldn't find a cure. That Derek was the alpha, that when Derek killed, I think, his uncle Peter, I'm not sure his name, but when he killed Peter, he became the alpha. But remember, Derek told him that if he killed the alpha, he would be cured and turned into human again. So that was Scott's whole motivation. He accepted the physical call to adventure, but not the emotional call. And I'm going to focus more on that with my character, because she only accepted the physical call, which is the transformation. And I would say she is really not invested in the world of the supernatural emotionally by the end of the book yet, in turn making her an even more selfish character than what she was at the beginning of the book, because the other werewolf characters need her help, but all she is worried about is finding a cure so she can be human again. However, could this be a problem while I'm writing this draft? Because she's the main character and I want to have her likable within the first book, or there is no reason for anyone to read the book, right? Her character arc could change within other books. We'll see. But yeah, I want to focus on the emotional call to adventure more so than the physical, because we already know that she's forced into becoming a werewolf. She has no alternative in becoming a werewolf, because versus, like, the same thing with Scott versus Scott. Scott has no alternative to become a werewolf. He was scratched, so he's forced into it. So he can't refuse it, but he can refuse it emotionally. So that's what I'm focusing on my character too. Like, she's born into that, so she can't refuse the call physically, but emotionally she's got to wrap her head around it, and she doesn't by the end of the book. So yeah, so I don't know, what do you think? Is it alright to have a selfish main character and refuse the call to adventure emotionally at the end of the book? I want to know. Let's start a dialogue. This is only the start of Serena's character breakdown, but I hope you liked it. I will be delving into Serena's character more in later episodes. What post-apocalyptic world have you created? Do you use the hero's journey model, or do you use the 3-act structure model? What is your main character's call to adventure and refusal to the call? Let me know in the comments below. I also want to start that dialogue about Scott, whether you think he refused the call throughout the season, or emotionally, or he accepted it in the pilot. So if you let me know, I want to know. Let's start a dialogue about it. Let me know in the comments. So if you like this episode and you want to tune in to next time's episode, like, subscribe, and share this episode. Leave your comments and suggestions for future podcasts. I would love to hear from you about that. So my Discovering the Blue Hour audio podcast is now exclusively free, only on discoveringbluehour.com. If you want even more content, take a journey through the website where you can discover all exclusive content pertaining to my work in progress werewolf novel. During the Blue Hour, there are short stories, important information about the podcast, blog posts, novel concept videos, and more. Okay, thanks for listening, and see you next time.